George and I grew up on the heavier side. In school, we were often shunned by other kids and had no choice but to stick together. People around us would often joke, "You two might as well end up together." I'd blush with embarrassment, but he'd always smile warmly. However, as time went by, George slimmed down, his physique became toned, and he gradually started to drift away from me. I thought I might just be overthinking it. That was until our parents brought up the old jokes again. George snapped in front of everyone. "Who would ever like a pig? That's disgusting." Chapter 1. George suddenly looked at me, his eyes glaring with anger. I was in the middle of cracking a crab. George loved crab but didn't have the patience to shell it, so he'd always get frustrated halfway through. So, I quietly watched tutorial videos online to learn how to shell crab. Since then, every time we had crab, I'd prepare a full bowl of crab meat for him, so all he had to do was move his hand and put it in his mouth. But at that moment, I paused, looking up at him in confusion, unsure why he was suddenly so upset. Everything had been fine a moment ago, with both families sitting together, chatting over dinner. The atmosphere relaxed and pleasant. Then, his mom saw me cracking the crab and chuckled. "Olivia is so considerate. George, you'll be in good hands one day." Before the words had even settled, George shot up from his seat and burst out, "Who would ever like a pig? That's disgusting." The first to react was George's dad, who stood up and smacked him on the back of the head. Frowning, he scolded, "What nonsense are you talking about? Apologize now." His mom also chimed in, but George stood his ground, his neck stiff with defiance. "Am I wrong? Just look at her, double chin, squinty eyes, rolls around her stomach like she's got a couple of life preservers. She'd probably float if you tossed her into water." Enough. My dad had heard enough. He banged the table with force, pointing at the door. "Get out!" George lifted his chin and, without hesitation, strode out of the room. His parents repeatedly apologized and followed him out. In a blink, the lively atmosphere vanished into silence. My mom put her arm around me, comforting me softly. "Olivia, don't listen to him. You're beautiful." I sighed and turned to look at her. "But he's not wrong." I tried to smile, but tears rolled down my face despite my efforts to hold them back. My mom's face was filled with sadness, and she whispered, "What happened to George? He wasn't like this before." But that was in the past. Chapter 2. George and I were childhood friends. Since we were both showered with love from our families, we spent our childhood with round, plump figures. In elementary school, we were the heaviest kids in class, only him and me. Even at a young age, kids have an eye for beauty. For those of us who didn't fit the standard, there was a bit of disdain. Unsurprisingly, we were both excluded because of our weight. But back then, we didn't care much. When other kids wouldn't play with us, we just played by ourselves. We'd often share snacks, talk about what we ate yesterday, and dream about whether tonight's dinner might bring a surprise. Over time, we became inseparable, sharing everything with each other. Our families got close too. By coincidence, we lived in the same building, just a few floors apart, and became almost like one big family. Sometimes, when work got busy, our parents would ask each other to watch us, which was a frequent occurrence. During holidays, our families often went on trips together or had meals together, just like one big happy family. George's mom was fond of me. She would pinch my cheeks and laugh, saying, "This little chubby girl is so lovable. She'd make a perfect daughter-in-law for our family." By then, I was in 6th grade and understood what she meant. I didn't feel uncomfortable, just shy and excited, my face turning red. "George, what do you think?" George would always smile and nod enthusiastically. "Of course. That way, I can keep eating Auntie's fried chicken wings." Hearing this, the adults would burst out laughing. I'd steal a glance at George, and just then, he'd look at me too. Our eyes would meet, filled with laughter, deep and brimming like the sea. Back then, I thought that the innocence of youth could overcome anything, but I'd forgotten how quickly things change. Chapter 3. The first thing that changed was George's weight. After our high school entrance exams, my grandmother fell seriously ill. So I went to the countryside with my parents and stayed there until almost the start of school. When I saw George again, I realized he had changed a lot. He'd grown taller and thinner, wearing a tank top. He had clear muscle definition on his arms. It was like he had transformed into a completely different person. I was shocked. "George, you actually lost weight behind my back. We agreed to enjoy food and stay chubby for life. How could you betray the cause?" "What nonsense. My mom made me work at my uncle's barbecue stand all summer. It was exhausting. I didn't even feel like eating. So of course I lost weight," George explained, then looked me up and down, frowning slightly. "But what about you? Didn't you go to the countryside? You look even heavier than before." At this, I scratched my head awkwardly. I couldn't help it. The food there was just too good, and the meat was so flavorful. I couldn't control myself. "Oh, right. I brought you a gift." I pulled out a package of cured meat, offering it to him proudly. "I picked this one especially for you. It's really delicious. Have your mom cook it up for you." George took it after a moment, setting it casually on the table. Then he checked the time on his watch and urged me. "I've got friends coming over to play games. They'll be here soon, so you should head out. I don't want them to see you." I didn't understand why he didn't want his friends to see me, but I didn't ask and just turned to go home. After that, every time I asked him to hang out or grab a bite, he'd turn me down. The reasons were always the same: I'm meeting up with friends to game, play basketball, hike, all sorts of excuses. Once, I even asked if I could join him. He looked me up and down and smirked. "You? Forget it. You're too lazy. You'd just hold us back." Seeing the disappointment on my face, he quickly added, "But I'll bring you something tasty." Hearing that, the cloud in my heart lifted immediately, and I smiled and nodded. Time flew by, and soon the start of school was here. As luck would have it, George and I ended up in the same class again. I was thrilled. As freshmen, we had 2 weeks of military training. On the first day, a girl standing in front of me fainted from low blood sugar while standing at attention. The instructor scanned the group and pointed at George. "You, step out and help that girl to the rest area." "Yes, sir." George's voice rang out, and he ran over to the girl, quietly asking her something. I don't know what he said, but the girl shook her head. Then, in front of everyone, he scooped her up and carried her across the field to the medical room. Cheers erupted all around us. I watched them fade into the distance, feeling an inexplicable weight pressing on my chest. During break, I found George and asked him about what happened earlier. He shrugged. "She said she couldn't stand up, so I had no choice but to carry her. I couldn't just leave her there, could I? We're all classmates. It's only right to help each other, isn't it?" Hearing that, I felt reassured and made up my mind about something. When it was time to stand at attention again, I looked up at the blazing sun, took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and let myself fall to the ground. "Instructor!" Someone fainted again, my classmates exclaimed. The instructor knelt to check on me, then called George over again. "Take her to the medical room." Eyes closed, I waited, filled with anticipation, but all I heard was George's indifferent voice above me. "Instructor, are you kidding? She's so heavy. How am I supposed to take her? Besides, with how much she weighs, there's no way she'd have low blood sugar. She's probably just trying to get out of training." Chapter 4. Hearing that, I tensed up, my fists clenching, feeling as if he had seen right through me. Before I could decide whether to get up, I heard the instructor's stern voice. "Watch your mouth. If you don't want to help, just say so. But don't talk nonsense. You, back in line. Everyone, resume standing at attention." After that, the instructor leaned down, helped me up, and walked me to the shade. "There's no one here. You don't have to pretend anymore." The tension melted away, and I finally opened my eyes, looking at the instructor. Standing up straight, I bowed my head. "Sorry, instructor." He watched me for a long time, long enough for my guilt and nervousness to take hold again. Finally, he spoke. "Since this is your first offense, and you admitted your mistake, I won't report you, but after training ends this afternoon, Run 2 laps around the field. Yes, sir, I responded eagerly, relief spreading through me. There are only 5 minutes until break, so you don't have to hurry back. Just rest here for a while. Yes, sir. As he walked away, I sat down, patting my chest to calm my nerves. Sitting there, I couldn't help but think of what George had said when I pretended to faint. She's so heavy. I looked down at my stomach, pinched the flesh on the back of my hand, and all the emotions I'd been pushing down flooded back in that moment. So, he was disgusted by me? Disgusted that I was heavy, unwilling to offer a helping hand, but he'd always said we were the same, that we'd never look down on each other. So then, hey, Olivia, lost in thought, I heard a familiar voice above me. I looked up, seeing George walking over. He reached out, offering me a bottle of cold water. I didn't take it, just looked at him, hesitated, and finally couldn't hold back. George, didn't you say it's only right to help each other out as classmates? Then why did you? You've got some nerve. Chapter 5. Before I could finish, George cut me off. Why on earth would you pretend to faint? I know you too well. I saw through you instantly. Good thing the instructor is dense. If he'd noticed, you'd be in serious trouble. Instructor's not dense, I muttered softly, but I still didn't quite get what he meant. I'm just looking out for you. You wanted to skip training by faking a fainting spell. If other students found out, they might copy you. Then, if someone genuinely needed help, it would cause a real problem. Besides, I'm sticking it out. So as my friend, how could you slack off? George's reasoning sounded convincing, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Before I could figure it out, he stood up suddenly. Eva, what brings you over? It was the first time I'd heard George speak in such a gentle tone, filled with a clear hint of affection. Looking up, I saw it was the same girl who had fainted earlier. I heard someone else fainted, so I brought some candy to help with the dizziness. Eva reached out, holding a few pieces of candy in her open palm. Before I could react, George quickly took the candy, smiling warmly. You're so thoughtful. Even when you're not feeling well, you still think about others. You still look a bit pale. Let me take you back for some more rest. There's no need. I can go back on my own. Eva smiled politely. You should stay and look after Olivia. With that, she turned and left. But George tried to say something but was a step too late, only able to watch her go. When she was out of sight, he turned back to me with a look of annoyance. Look at her, then look at yourself. Don't you feel ashamed? I did feel ashamed, lowering my head in embarrassment. If it weren't for you, she wouldn't have misunderstood. A gust of wind swept past, his muttered words disappearing into the breeze. Confused, I looked up, hoping for an explanation, but all I got was a face filled with impatience. Don't eat that candy, George said, looking down at the candy in his hand, gripping it tightly. You're already so heavy. Eating it will only make you gain more weight. Heavy. That was the second time today he'd called me that. I couldn't tell if he meant it or not anymore. Chapter 6. Everyone dismissed. With the instructor's command, my classmates scattered in all directions. I walked slowly to the track and began to run. Even though it was late afternoon, the summer heat still lingered, and within 200 meters, I felt like I was in an oven. I wished there were a pond nearby so I could just dive in and escape the heat. As I ran, I faintly heard someone calling my name. I turned to look, and there were George and Eva. Olivia, it's really you, Eva exclaimed in surprise, then looked puzzled. Everyone's been dismissed. Why are you still running? And didn't you faint earlier? You should rest instead of overexerting yourself. She's just... Before I could think of a response, George cut in. She probably realized she's put on some weight and wants to work it off. Besides, she was just faking earlier. With her size, who would believe she's fragile? George! Hearing him criticize me so openly, I was both humiliated and furious. Yes, it was wrong of me to pretend to faint, but he had no right to judge me like that. Even if he was my best friend, this was too much. I didn't dare look at Eva, imagining she'd look at me with disdain or even pity. Clenching my fists, I bit down on my lip, ready to walk away. But just then, Eva spoke in a gentle voice. Chapter 7. Who says only thin people can get sick? Anyone can feel unwell, and it doesn't need an explanation. Her words stopped me in my tracks, and I looked at her in surprise. There was no mockery in her expression, just a gentle smile that felt as refreshing as a spring breeze. No matter what, health is the most important thing. Everything else comes second. Thanks for your help earlier, Sue. I won't disturb you two any longer. Goodbye. Eva waved and turned to leave. George watched her go, glaring at me with annoyance. This is all your fault. With that, he hurried after her. I stood there, bewildered. My fault? I hadn't even said anything. What a jerk! Rolling my eyes, I put them out of my mind and continued running. For some reason, though, the running felt lighter and easier this time. Though I was still tired, I felt an inexplicable sense of happiness. 2 weeks of military training flew by, and I was finally free to go home. When I stepped inside, I was greeted by the aroma of food. Looking over, I saw the table full of my favorite dishes. Seeing me, my mom called out, "Go change and wash up. George's family will be here soon." Okay. When I came out of my room, George's family had already arrived. I greeted him with a smile, but he only gave me a quick glance before looking back at his phone. I leaned over, curious about what he was playing, but he noticed and immediately locked his screen. He glared at me. "Who said you could look?" I wasn't, I stammered, trying to explain, but he didn't give me a chance. He got up and moved to another seat. It was clear he wanted distance from me. I felt a pang of sadness. We used to be so close. I could walk into his room without even knocking. How did we become strangers so quickly? I didn't know what had changed, but I knew I must have done something wrong. During dinner, I tried to make it up to him by shelling his crab as a peace offering, but all I got in return was a snide remark. Chapter 8. I decided to lose weight. Before, when people teased me, I'd console myself with the thought that I had a friend who truly understood me. But now, he was the one hurting me. Just thinking about his look of disdain made me loathe the fat on my body. It was truly repulsive. When my parents found out about my decision, they were the first to object. "What's the point of dieting? You're perfectly fine the way you are. We raised you healthy and happy, not for you to waste away for no reason. You should ignore George and his nonsense. Let him say whatever he wants." My mom was especially furious at the mention of George. All those fried chicken wings I made for him, wasted on a dog. Not only did they firmly oppose my diet, but they also started watching me at mealtime to ensure I didn't skip a bite. Since I couldn't diet at home, I had to find ways to try at school. During lunch, when everyone went to the cafeteria, I went to the track to run, but before long, I felt dizzy and nauseated. My vision blurred, and all I wanted was to collapse. Unable to continue, I pulled out my phone and, without much hope, called George. "George, I don't feel well. Could you?" "Olivia, are you faking sick again? Aren't you tired of the same trick?" George snapped and hung up. Along with the call, he cut off the last bit of hope I had clung to. There was nothing left. Just before I blacked out, I thought I saw someone running towards me in a rush, but I couldn't see who it was. Chapter 9. When I woke up, I was in the school's medical room. "You're awake?" I turned and saw Eva sitting beside me. She looked at me with concern. "How are you feeling? Are you still uncomfortable?" I shook my head. "The doctor said you had heat stroke. Just rest for a while, and you'll be fine. It's best not to go out to the track during midday in such hot weather." "How did you?" "I happened to be passing by and saw you fainted on the ground, so I got someone to help bring you here." Eva winked at me with a playful smile. "After all, I'm a bit of an expert at fainting. I know exactly what to do." Her words made me smile too. I thanked her sincerely. "Thank you so much. If it weren't for you, I'd probably still be lying out there." "No need to thank me. We're classmates. Helping each other is just what we're supposed to do." Hearing the familiar phrase, I felt a pang of disbelief. Helping each other is supposed to be normal? Then why did a near stranger help me without hesitation? while the person I thought was my closest friend ignored my call for help. Feelings are truly difficult to understand, but I am curious. What were you doing out on the track in the middle of the day? Embarrassed. I didn't want to reveal my reason, but since she just helped me, I didn't want to lie. I mumbled that I was trying to lose weight. So, you skipped lunch to go running? Eva's eyes widened in shock. No wonder you got heat stroke. This way of losing weight is dangerous. It could ruin your health. I don't care. I'd rather be weak than be the fat girl everyone looks down on. How can you think like that? Her sudden outburst startled me, pulling me out of my self-pity. I stared at her, unsure of what to say. Chapter 10. Do you know how much I envy you? Eva sighed, extending her hand. Her wrist was slender, her skin pale, her veins visible. My health has always been poor. I can't do much physically, and in gym class, I have to sit on the sidelines while everyone else has fun. I can't even go on school trips because of the risks. I begged to be part of military training this year. Not because I want special treatment, but because I just want to be like everyone else. But my body failed me. When George said you were faking, I felt relieved because that meant you weren't really sick. You're still healthy. You might see yourself as fat, but to me, you're not. Maybe a little chubby, but definitely within the range of healthy. Who says thin is the only way to be beautiful? There's no one definition of beauty. And right now, we're in high school. Academics are demanding enough. If you start obsessing over dieting, you'll lose focus, weaken your body, and fall behind in your studies. Wouldn't you regret throwing away your future for some idea of beauty? Eva held my hand, comparing it to hers. Her fingers were thin and delicate, while mine were noticeably larger. Try gripping my hand. I did as she said. She smiled wryly. See? You didn't even try. Yet I can't break free. What you despise in yourself is something others can only dream of having. Before you love anyone else, learn to love yourself. I looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. I nodded slowly, taking her words to heart. Chapter 11. Eva gave me a meal plan. It was a special low-calorie diet she had prepared for me. I know my words might not sink in right away, but if you're determined to lose weight, I hope you'll do it gradually instead of rushing. Because of my health, my parents are very careful with my diet and have consulted experts to create balanced meals for me. I asked them to make this meal plan for you, and I hope it helps. I accepted it with surprise and gratitude, momentarily speechless. Just then, George walked over, overhearing our conversation. He sneered, "Olivia, you, trying to lose weight? Start by controlling your cravings first. If you can give up snacks and milk tea, I'll actually respect you." Anger flared up, but I held back. The other day, I fainted on the track and called you for help. You hung up. And in the end, Eva was the one who brought me here. Don't you have anything to say about that? I expected at least a hint of remorse from him, but his reaction was even worse than I could have imagined. Eva took you to the medical room? George's eyes widened, both shocked and angry. Olivia, are you crazy? You know how heavy you are. What if Eva got hurt? How could you even ask her for help? He then turned to Eva with concern. Are you okay? Eva, are you hurt? I nearly laughed out loud. I felt ridiculous for ever having feelings for him. Eva looked confused. Aren't you two friends? Olivia fainted. Don't you care at all? Why would anything happen to her? George shrugged dismissively. She's as tough as a bull. If anyone's going to be fine, it's her. But you're so delicate. If she had fallen on you, George. Eva's face turned cold, the gentleness gone, replaced by a stern look I had never seen before. Please respect Olivia and stop using her weight to insult her. Can you do that? Seeing Eva's irritation, George panicked and tried to explain, but Eva didn't give him a chance and walked back to her seat. Watching George standing there, bewildered, I felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction. This is exactly what he deserves. Serves him right. Chapter 12. I decided to cut George out of my life, permanently, but to my surprise, he suddenly started trying to cozy up to me again. He'd bring me breakfast, buy me milk tea, and even stuff my desk full of snacks. It was bewildering. The next time he placed a milk tea on my desk, I called him out. What do you want, George? Just say it. Nothing. Just treating my good friend to milk tea. Good friend? I raised an eyebrow at him. A good friend who ignores a call for help. A good friend who insults and mocks. George, do you even understand what a friend is? George's face flushed, his expression awkward. He looked around, then leaned in close and lowered his voice. Olivia, I know I was wrong before. I'll apologize. We've known each other for so long. Can you just let it go? I can let it go. But what then? If you're over it, then help me explain things to Eva. Tell her I ignored you because I thought you were faking it. Normally, I'm very caring towards you. He frowned, looking troubled. She's been so distant lately, probably because she's still upset about the last time. It's all because of you, so you should talk to her and clear things up. So that was his real reason. If Eva hadn't distanced herself, he wouldn't have apologized to me in a million years. He didn't think he was wrong. He only cared about Eva's opinion. So, you like Eva? George didn't deny it. Of course. She's beautiful, slim, and has such a gentle temperament. Who wouldn't like her? You're right. I nodded, gave him a small smile, then asked him seriously. So what makes you think you deserve her? Chapter 13. George froze, not understanding what I meant. What did you say? I repeated calmly. Eva is amazing in every way. So, tell me, what makes you think you deserve her? Is it your complete lack of emotional intelligence, those so-called muscles, or that mouth of yours that only seems fit for swallowing flies? Liking someone isn't just about their looks. You need to look at yourself too. Olivia, are you crazy? George, flustered and angry, almost started shouting, but I felt a satisfaction rising within me, a liberating thrill that made me want to laugh out loud. Why should he get to insult and mock me without me fighting back? I'm not his caretaker. I don't owe him any tolerance. He glared at me, red in the face, then sneered as if a thought had suddenly come to him. A bad feeling crept over me. Olivia, you've always been so nice and passive, but now that I've told you I like Eva, you suddenly blow up. I get it, you're jealous. You're mad because you like me, and you don't want me to be with her, so you're acting nasty to hold on to me. You probably befriended Eva on purpose, right? You're scared she'll take me away from you, so you've been trying to sabotage us from the beginning. You're manipulative, Olivia. And since we're being honest, let me be clear, I could never like you. You don't stand a chance. Instead of wasting time scheming, why don't you lose some weight? Nobody wants to be with a pig. I watched George's mouth open and close, spewing insult after insult. At first, I felt hurt, but as he went on, the hurt faded. By the end, seeing him so confidently spout off, thinking he'd exposed some hidden truth, I found him pathetic. You're safe, George. If I ever liked you, I'd be a dog. With that, I picked up my milk tea and threw it at him. As he stood there, drenched, looking both ridiculous and furious, I smiled. Get lost. And don't make me sick again. Fine. Olivia, don't come crying to me later. He stormed off, leaving behind an empty threat. Crying? No. I wouldn't cry. I was already looking forward to better days. Chapter 14. I completely cut George out of my life. We ignored each other at school, avoided any situation that might force us together, and no longer shared meals when our families gathered. My parents already disliked him after what happened, and now that we'd broken ties, they didn't try to bridge the gap between our families. Before long, what had once been two close-knit families were strangers. I didn't mind and moved on with my life. George, on the other hand, was struggling. The reason? Eva. Eva and I had become close friends, spending time together constantly. George tried hard to get closer to her without having to be around me, but every time he'd try to send me away, it wouldn't work. Whenever I saw him standing off to the side, frustrated and watching us, I couldn't help but smile. Of course, I asked Eva about her feelings. After all, my conflict with George was between us. It didn't involve her. If she had feelings for George, I wouldn't interfere. But, as it turned out, Eva wasn't interested in him at all. In fact, she was somewhat disgusted. Using a girl's weight to put her down is a pretty low move. He also tries to lift one person up by tearing another down, which is even worse, especially considering you two were friends. I think he's got some issues. It's best to keep some distance. Hearing this, I wanted to record her words and play them back to George on a loop. Let him see how his actions had backfired. Chapter 15. With a sense of kindness, I managed to convey Eva's thoughts to George. I hoped he'd give up and move on, mainly because I was tired of him lurking around like some shadow, giving me chills every time I felt his gaze. Maybe he finally got the message. As he eventually stopped hovering around, I felt liberated, free at last. But soon after, rumors about me began to circulate around school. A post popped up on the school's forum, saying I had some kind of mental disorder and that I stayed overweight to cater to people with certain tastes. Not long after, some explicit photos appeared, provocative poses with a blurred face. But the body looked strikingly like mine. Even a scar on the thigh matched mine closely. Whispers and strange glances followed me wherever I went, as if I were on display, an object of ridicule. Fed up, I went to the teacher for help. Leaving the office, I spotted George standing in front of Eva. Seeing me, he smirked, then stepped forward. "Olivia, I never imagined you were like this. All these years, I've been so blind. If you can't respect yourself, at least don't drag others down with you. Stay away from Eva. If you bring her into this, I won't forgive you." Watching the smug look he tried to hold back, I smirked. "Oh, really? You say I don't respect myself. Do you have any proof? It's all over school. What more proof do you need? And those photos on the forum, aren't they proof enough? Photos can be edited. How can you be sure that's me?" I stepped closer, my gaze fixed on him. "Let me remind you, if you can't prove those photos are real, it's defamation. If you can, it's a crime of distributing obscene material. Neither is a good look." George's smug smile vanished as he started to falter, his voice unsteady. "Why are you telling me this? It's not like I posted them." "Nothing. Just chatting." I shrugged casually. "But if I were that person, I'd delete them quickly. With today's technology, it's easy to track the source, and it'll be ugly when it's exposed." The teacher said she'd investigate, so I hope we get answers before any posts disappear. I sighed, looking off in feigned contemplation. George's brow furrowed as he turned and hurried away. Once he left, Eva came over, whispering, "I suspect. No need to. It's him." Seeing my certainty, Eva was puzzled. "Did you find evidence?" I shook my head. "Not yet, but his reaction was enough. And he's one of the few who knows about that scar on my thigh. We grew up together. He saw it. He knows exactly what it looks like. If that scar hadn't appeared in the photos, I might not have been so sure. But this time, he'd let his own trap betray him." Chapter 16. George thought that deleting those posts and photos would make everything disappear, as if nothing had ever happened. But he was too naive. There was one thing I hadn't told him. I had gone to the police. Before talking to the teacher, my parents and I had already filed a police report. Talking to the teacher was just for George's benefit, to make him think it was merely a school matter. The cybercrime officers tracked down the source quickly. When the police showed up, George was at home browsing for ways to ruin my reputation even further. But before he could find anything, he was taken away. The evidence was conclusive, and since he was already 16, the school board decided to expel him. Before leaving, he was required to apologize publicly to the entire student body, clearing my name. George's parents came by multiple times to apologize, hoping for forgiveness, but my parents wouldn't even let them in. What he did before was just childish ignorance. But this is rotten to the core. People like him are a bad omen. I don't want them in our home. I worried that my mom would make herself sick with anger and tried to comfort her. Chapter 17. The next time I saw George was at my wedding. I had gotten into my dream university, graduated successfully, found a job I loved, and met the man I wanted to spend my life with. We'd set a date and send invitations to family and friends. On the wedding day, after the ceremony, I went back to the dressing room to change into my reception dress. When I opened the door, someone was standing there. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. "George? Years had passed. He looked darker, heavier, with thinning hair and a weariness etched into his face. Seeing me, he looked nervous, wringing his hands and forcing a smile. "Olivia, I didn't expect you to get married so soon. It's all a bit sudden. I only just heard and wanted to come by to give my best wishes." His eyes lingered on me with a hint of admiration. "I was sitting far back, so I couldn't see you clearly before, but up close, you're beautiful. Really, you've grown so graceful." "Really? Weren't you the one who called me a pig? Said I was disgusting?" I shot back without mercy. "I haven't lost any weight. You know, I'm still basically the same. Make sure you're not mistaken." No, I was just young back then. Didn't know how to appreciate it." He waved his hands, eyes still hungrily drinking in the sight of me. "I saw your husband. You know, he kind of looks like me. So maybe you haven't quite let go of me?" "Not at all." I interrupted him with an eye roll, fighting the urge to gag. I said slowly and clearly, "My husband is an amazing man, with every good quality imaginable. If he resembles you in any way, I'd consider that his biggest flaw." George's face darkened instantly, mumbling. He tried to say something. I raised a hand to stop him. "Please don't tell me you've realized you actually liked me all along. I'd find that revolting." Seeing my cousin and his friends nearby, I quickly called them over. Pointing at George, I said, "This guy spread horrible rumors about me back in school, and now he's here to harass me. I don't even know how he got in. Can you do me a favor and show him out?" My cousin and his friends, in that fierce phase of standing up to anything unjust, were more than happy to help. They immediately grabbed George, stuffing a napkin into his mouth and carrying him out. As soon as he was gone, Eva came over, curious. "What happened?" "I heard some noise." "Nothing, just a dog that wandered in, and my cousin chased him out." "A dog? How did that happen?" Eva raised her eyebrows but didn't give it much thought. "Hurry and get back to the reception. The guests are waiting." "Right." I lifted my dress and hurried back toward the hall. Back to my happiness.